It's awesome to be out here today to get to talk to you guys about this new project of mine. When Border Lore came out, the History Press contacted me and they wanted for me to do a book on ghosts in the Rio Grande Valley. In general, they want more historical and cultural things from the Rio Grande Valley. There's not very much, they say. And the History Press does a lot of these local historical pieces, regional things, and they wanted to make sure that we had good representation. Now, I've been, as has been said, I had 8 books before this one, and I've been working and writing as a folklorist and an educator and a writer of fiction of different types for quite a while. But I grew up in the Rio Grande Valley. My parents graduated from McAllen High School. We have deep roots here. On one side of my family, we're Anglo-American on my mom's side, and on my dad's side, we're Mexican-American. And when you grow up in the valley, you grow up hearing all of these stories. And I was always drawn back to it because, you know, having learned the craft of storytelling at the knee of my grandmother Casa, I kind of grew into that as an adult. I went to college, was one of the first people in my family to go to college and get a degree and so forth. But I kept getting pulled back to those stories I heard as a child. And so a lot of my work has been about kind of trying to preserve those stories and retell them in ways that people are going to find fascinating. So when this was proposed to me, I definitely thought it would be a fantastic idea. But I told them, look, if I'm going to write about ghosts, there's something that you need to understand about the way I look at ghosts. So there's kind of 2 ways of looking at ghosts, and I think they're both important when we're talking about the Rio Grande Valley. One of them is obviously the actual revenants of people who have moved on. So when we have tragedies, for example, like the bus accident in Alton all those years ago, right? And those 21 children who died. I was working at McDuff's at the time. I was a TV salesman as I was going to college. I was 19 years old. And all the TVs were turned to Channel 5 as they pulled the bodies out of the water. It was a harrowing kind of thing to see all those young children with sheets draped over them. And those kinds of things leave an impact. And you can argue whether it's a spiritual impact, whether it's like a psychological impact for the community. It's hard to say. A lot of people believe that there are spirits in places that have remained behind because of the trauma of what happened at that place. So there's that way of looking at it. Revenants of people who've moved on. And that's kind of, scary, and where you see a ghost, and somebody take a picture and there'll be a spectral apparition behind the person or whatever. But there's that other aspect of ghosts, like the ghost of our past, the scars of our community. Because the Rio Grande Valley, people didn't just decide one day, oh, we're going to build communities down there, and it wasn't some kind of like beautiful just coming together of different groups that worked together shoulder to shoulder to make the valley this beautiful place for people to come and settle. Its history is a lot more complex than that, and a lot of times the reality of what happened for the valley to become what it is has been glossed over or frankly just hidden away completely. And so I told them, I want to explore not only stories of haunted places, but I want to explore the actual history of those places and try to show people that there's a lot of times a connection between the two. That the things that we try to forget or don't tell our children about or that have been erased from our school books or whatever, those things find expression in stories of haunted places. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about the history of the valley, and then I'll give you some examples from the book so you can kind of get a feel for what I'm trying to do. So the Rio Grande Valley, long before any Europeans stepped foot over here, was the domain of the Cuauhtecan Indians. Okay? The Cuauhtecan Indians roamed up and down the Rio Grande. They had a nomadic life. Some people would argue it was a very poor, hard scrabble, difficult life. But as far as we're able to tell, they were content with that life. They were closer perhaps to nature than we are. They didn't, use stone implements. They didn't create pottery. Their weapons were made of bone and wood, and their implements and so forth. And they lived in the brushland and the forest near the little resacas, the little oxbow lakes. When the Spanish came, obviously, and conquered Mexico, they slowly moved their way north. And under New Spain, all these missions were set up along the river, especially the ones that come to mind immediately are on our side of Brownsville and Roma, and then Mission. Those were like the first three that kind of were established. And those people were like absorbed into the mestizo population that was brought up to the north from deeper in the south, or converted on their own. And bit by bit, the Cuauhtecans began to disappear, just to be absorbed or killed off or whatever. And a lot of these Cuauhtecans were pushed over the border eventually when we went from New Spain first to Mexico, and the province that had been called Nuevo Santander, New Santander, that was what is now Tamaulipas and the Rio Grande Valley, became the state of Coahuila y Texas under Mexico. And then, of course, there was a Mexican-American War. Texas became, an independent nation for a while, the Republic of Texas, before becoming a state in the U.S. And frankly, the border just like crossed over people. So you had these people with roots that were indigenous, then mixed with Spanish, and then had become nationally Mexican, and now were Mexican-American. And along the way, the King of Spain had first apportioned out large tracts of land, huge land grants to rich families. And then as the national identity of the place changed, the rights to those lands became more and more tenuous, and people began to come in and take the land away through various different ways. Buying it up at a cheap cost, because what good was 600,000 acres of land doing a family if they were struggling to survive? They were willing to sell it off really cheaply, or through all kinds of like legal wrangling and taking people to court and so forth, so that you get people like the founders of the King Ranch, who basically like just grabbed up all of this land from Mexican families. And when in the first decade of the 20th century, you had all these Anglo settlements beginning to crop up, you suddenly have a displacement of the Mexican-American people. They are kind of marginalized. They don't get to partake as much in the political process. Separate schools are set up for them. Separate neighborhoods are set up for them. Sometimes separate towns altogether. And then the Mexican Revolution comes along and complicates things even further. And I would say about half of the stories in here, when you delve into the history, you're going to see that decade from 1910 to 1920 is the time that left the deepest scars. The ones that don't heal very well, and that sometimes are still, open wounds that are suppurating in our collective consciousness. Because Anglos in the Rio Grande Valley became very, very concerned about, and understandably so, because there were all of these revolutionaries crossing over and doing things in the Rio Grande Valley. There were attacks, and something began to occur that was later dubbed the Bandit Wars. But what it was these revolutionaries crossing over, trying to get material they needed to then cross back over and continue their fight in that Revolutionary War. And in 1915, a man was caught in McAllen with a document that scared the bejesus out of everybody. It was the Plan de San Diego. Have you guys heard about this before? So the Plan de San Diego basically said, okay, so the entire southwest of the United States is ill-gotten gains. The way the United States got that property was during the Mexican-American War. They sent troops to surround Mexico City, and at gunpoint, essentially, with the threat of military action, Mexico was forced to sign the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo and sell the United States for a pittance all of that land. So now, you guys, just like we're like rising up in Mexico, Mexican Americans in the Southwest should rise up as well. And the document said, we urge you on, I guess it was like February 20th, 1915, go out and kill every Anglo-American male over the age of 16. Now, Anglo-American males were understandably a little concerned about this, right? They were like, oh snap, because that means me. I don't know about this. I'm not really interested in being lynched. But again, you have to understand, these were Mexican revolutionaries trying to get Mexican Americans to do something. The majority of Mexican Americans were like, thanks for the offer, but no, we'll handle our things our way. However, there was a panic as a result. And you may, if you're thinking about our modern times, you'll begin to see parallels between that fear of the Mexican-American community in the valley and some of our present fears in the United States of groups that might be causing us some harm. 100,000 federal troops were sent to the Rio Grande Valley. There weren't 100,000 Mexican Americans in the Rio Grande Valley, and now there were 100,000 troops, National Guard from different states, and you had the Texas Rangers. Now, when I was in school, and to this day the same thing is taught, Texas Rangers were kind of lifted up as these, valiant protectors, almost like knights that had, made sure that South Texas was safe from Indians and Mexicans and all kinds of unsavory people, right? And there was very little questioning by my history teachers of anything that they had done. But in our community, I was hearing a very different story as I was growing up. And to this day, you still hear a different story. And it's now coming out more and more, and you're having articles written about it, and there are like museum, traveling exhibits for museums about this. But Texas Rangers from 1915 to 1918 waged what could be argued was a war of terror on the Mexican American community in South Texas. Because of these understandable fears of revolution and stuff like that, rather than protecting the border and arresting people that they suspected, taking them before a judge, having a trial, stuff like that, many Texas Rangers, clearly not all of them, many Texas Rangers carried out summary justice on the frontier, on the border, and thousands of Mexican Americans were lynched. An example would be in the summer of 1915, close to Brownsville, a train was derailed by these revolutionaries from Mexico. They went into the derailed train, got in the car, stole people's stuff, killed a couple of Anglos, got on their horses, and rode back to Mexico. The Texas Rangers came and found that they were too late to stop these guys, and they followed the trail to Mexico because these fools were like dropping, they were in such a hurry to get out of the United States that they were like dropping jewelry and stuff along the way. And so there was a clear path to the border. But obviously the Texas Rangers could not cross over to pursue them any further. So they doubled back and came upon a ranch that was near the incident. And there were 10 Mexican-American men who were very startled to see this contingent of, a sheriff's posse and Texas Rangers coming to the ranch. Immediately the Texas Rangers said, "You guys saw who these people were, and we want information." And they denied knowing anything. They're like, "You're here in this ranch. They rode through this ranch. How can you be saying that you didn't know anything?" And they continued to deny it. The Texas Rangers decided then and there that those 10 men were guilty. Okay, they lynched 6 of them. 4 of them ran, tried to escape. They were shot in the back. Okay, this was the sort of thing that happened all of the time. And these are the scars that are in our community, because this kind of stuff wasn't reported to authorities. Some of them, like that particular one was, and it was one of the reasons that the federal government in 1918 basically said to the Texas Rangers, "Cease and desist. You will no longer be judge, jury, and executioner. If you suspect somebody, you arrest them, and they go through the legal process. This is insane what you're doing." And a lot of that had to do with the fact that the Mexican government stepped in and said, "Guys, no, come on, please do something about your Texas Rangers. This is insane. They're vigilantes." So lynchings continued throughout that period without being reported, because what are you going to do? The very people that you would, if you were a Mexican American and say your uncle was lynched, who are you going to go report it to? The sheriff is working with the Texas Rangers. The Texas Rangers themselves are the people who are in charge. You're not going to go to the National Guard or other federal troops. To you, all of them are the problem. So you just swallow your pride, cut down your loved one, and try to give them a decent burial. Some people couldn't even do that. When I was doing research on this book, and I did research in a couple different ways. One of them was scholarly research, looking at books and articles and stuff like that. Another one's just like remembering, because most of the ghost stories that I'm retelling are ghost stories I heard when I was growing up, and so writing that stuff down. But a lot of it also was talking to people. And so when I would talk to people in the San Juan, Alamo area about Texas Rangers, one name kept cropping up among the oldest people, and that was Tom Mayfield. Now, Mayfield has got things named after him in San Juan, right? And he was, in his later years, a law enforcement officer and so forth in that area. And lots of people, there are people that say, no me toques a Tom Mayfield. Don't talk about Tom Mayfield. He was a hero or whatever. Because there are some people that have like brainwash themselves or whatever. But when you talk to the viejitos that are like sitting on the benches outside of HEB and stuff like that, they'll tell you, ese señor era un monstruo. He was a monster. This is the guy who is responsible for lynching 14 Mexican Americans in the Alamo City Park, and then shooting them in the head, and then cutting them down and burning their bodies before burying them without any kind of ceremony, without a priest present or anything like that. He was reviled. And again, that was during the Bandit War period. When the federal government shut everything down, Tom Mayfield lost his his job with the Texas Rangers, and he wasn't prosecuted. They just, like, it was a slap on the wrist kind of thing. And he eventually went to work as part of security for an American petroleum company in Mexico, of all places, right? And so this guy who's like lynched probably hundreds of Mexican Americans goes to work in Mexico. It's a security at this petroleum plant. Well, one evening he decided he was going to go to a cantina and get drunk because he liked his drink. And he went in and he had a couple of drinks too much, and he started talking smack about Mexicans in a bar full of Mexicans, which is, I don't know, kind of points to like his lack of like wisdom. And he had his throat cut. And he didn't die, but afterwards his voice was reduced to this kind of a raspy whisper. And they called him Whispering Tom. Whispering Tom eventually made his way back into San Juan, back into law enforcement or whatever. And the community there, swears that he continued to mistreat Mexican Americans. And I mean, he was an effective law enforcement officer, I suppose, to the extent that people were scared out of their minds of this guy and behaved themselves because their parents or uncles or aunts or cousins had been lynched by him earlier during all this stuff, right? So this building right here, the San Juan Hotel, that's abandoned and scary as all get out. Has anybody ever been driven by it? You just look at it and you're like, wow, why didn't somebody do, it's a beautiful building. Look at that. Couldn't they like refurbish that and reopen it or whatever? I can't imagine the community wanting anybody to do that. I remember I graduated from PSJ, and I remember in my senior year, my friends Gustavo and Ranulfo and I went into this place, and it's like you feel like this darkness and cold, and like we didn't see like ghosts or anything like that, but you feel like a weight of trauma, because what the people say in that region is that the souls of people who were lynched nearby by Tom Mayfield haunt this place. And here's a really ironic thing, and it's in the story of the haunting here. Tom Mayfield spent his waning years after retiring in this hotel. He lived there. He didn't have a lot of friends. His wife was dead. Didn't have a lot of family or anything like that. So he was by himself. And people would come and interview him because he was like this historical figure who was kind of dark and mysterious. But for the most part, he just was alone. And the people, they affirm to this day that what began to happen to him was that the ghosts began to torture him. They began to show up and wake him up in the middle of the night and make his life miserable. And he got sicker and sicker and sicker until he had to go to the San Juan hospital. And dicen los viejitos, the old people say, the spirits followed him to the hospital. And as he lay in his deathbed, they tortured him, reminding him of the things he had done, showing him image after image of the dead bodies and the burnt bodies and the shot bodies and the hung bodies. And they made his final days an absolute misery. And when he died, they say, the spirits were there to seize his soul and drag it back with them to the San Juan Hotel. And that's what's happening to this very day, people say, in that hotel. Those spirits continue to torture the soul of Tom Mayfield, and they will do so for eternity. And that kind of thing makes you go, wow. That's dark. That is some dark story right there. And I do explore those kinds of things and the repercussions of our past on the present. And because there's a couple things that you could say about that. You could say, well, maybe Tom Mayfield's soul is really being tortured by ghosts in this hotel. Or maybe the story arises as a way for the community to grapple with the pain that the man caused the Mexican-American community, right? Like, how do you deal with that? If this is not happening, then it ought to happen. And so maybe it's a kind of like folkloric wish fulfillment, right? But I tell you what, I went in there, and I would not go in there at night, The place is creepy as heck. When I had Alexis and Jose go take pictures, and they went, like the photograph has been altered a little bit and kind of shaded, but they went a plena luz del sol, right? They did not go, they went during the daylight hours. They weren't going to go at night and take pictures. I was like, go like at twilight to get pictures. They're like, no, we're not going to go to that place at twilight and stand around on that property. They're like big chickens. I wish they could have been here because they did an awesome job. The image is so great. But they would go places during the day. They're like, we can use filters to make it look like it's darker. We don't want to take pictures of this stuff at night. But not all the stories in here are that dark. There are ghost stories that are kind of interesting. For example, anybody from the Lyford area around here? Most of you guys are going to be like from Mission. What I'm talking about, anybody from the Lyford area? So there's like a woman in white that hovers around near an overpass of the expressway there in Lyford. And apparently, what happened was in the 60s, she was like this kind of hippie girl who was coming back from like a Chicano rally, maybe in Corpus, I think, and she was involved in an accident and died there. And now her spirit has remained, not because she's angry or she has unfinished business, but because she doesn't want anybody else to die. And so people who have almost been in accidents have talked about how, who picked her up as a hitchhiker, have almost had accidents, and she's done something to like stop the accident from happening, has warned them in advance, or in the case of the story that I have in here, a young man took her for a ride on his motorcycle, and when there was all this like mist and so forth, and he almost collided with the truck, but her hands reached out through his body and grabbed the handlebars of the motorcycle and pulled him off onto an off-ramp and like saved him from an accident, and then of course disappeared. So, you know, those kinds of ghosts, that's the kind of ghosts we prefer to hear about, right? We don't hear about the scary ones who are like torturing other people. It's horrible. And so what I want to do is I'm going to share a couple of these stories with you from Hidalgo County. I thought that would be kind of cool. The Casa de Palmas Hotel. You guys familiar with it, right? Oh, tons of ghosts there. Now, the way these articles are set up is there's first a section on the history, like you're going to be able to see this, but it says the history, okay? And then right after the history, then you have the legend, so that people can get the background before they read the legend. And my idea with this is like, people love scary stories, and they'll buy a book because they're like, oh, it's got ghosts and monsters, whatever. And so you hook them in with that, and then you slide the educational experience under the wire, you know, hidden. And I teach at UTRGV. I teach literature in the Literature and Cultural Studies department. Before that, I was a public school teacher for 14 years, and then a school administrator, director of English language arts, and then bilingual education at Donna ISD. And so I'm all about education, even though I also love like really, really scary stuff. So if I can combine the two, I'm super happy. And I was a library coordinator for 1 year, right? Don't you guys miss me? Yeah. Donna ISD librarian. Woo-hoo. She's one of the best in that district too.
We love you.
Oh, we love. I miss you guys a lot too.
One of his books, The Smoky Mirror, it takes place
at the campus where she works. Yeah. I love doing that sort of thing. Okay, man, I need bifocals so bad. This is ridiculous. All right, so I'm gonna go like this. All right, I'll be able to read it like this. Those of you who are older than me, you can feel compassion for me. Those of you who are younger, you'll get here eventually. So, 46, and my eyesight is already like, whoa. I need for the History Press to send me like the large print edition of the books. All right, the history. The largest city in Hidalgo, center of commerce for the area and perhaps the most widely known valley community in the outside world, McAllen came into existence as a sort of hostile merger between two different competing communities in 1911. Its namesake, John McAllen, could hardly have imagined this eventuality when he married Salome Bailly the Young, the widow of his former boss, John Young, in 1861. So his boss died and he married his boss's wife. It's costly. Salome, you know, a more malicious mind could like suspect all kinds of foul play there, but it was innocent as far as anybody can tell. Salome held considerable property at the time. She had inherited most of it from her great-grandfather, Jose Manuel Gomez, who had established the Santa Ana Ranch in 1797 on 95,000 acres granted to him by King Charles IV of Spain. She and her late husband had since acquired and annexed surrounding property, and she continued this practice with her new spouse. They renamed the estate the McAllen Ranch, By 1885, it comprised 160,000 acres. That's a big ranch, right? When the railroads finally reached the ranch in 1904, John McAllen and his son James Bailly McAllen donated land so that the tracks would pass through their property. Very smart, right? Everybody should have railroads passing through their property, unless it's really small. I don't want railroads passing through my half acre lot. Odd. Which they had decided to transform into a town. They set up a company to explore possibilities along with James' older half-brother, John J. Young. Harlingen founder Lon C. Hill and Uriah Lott, presidents of the St. Louis, Brownsville, and Mexican Railroad, also worked with them. The new town of McAllen grew slowly despite being the site of the train depot closest to Edinburgh, the county seat. Its sickly infancy was complicated by the establishment of a new community just 2 miles to the east, the work of John Klausner. El mendigo Klausner. He had to go around putting his nose in everybody's business, along with William Briggs and O.E.M. Jones, who arranged for an irrigation canal and used their business connections to quickly attract some 300 souls to the town. People began to call the settlement East McAllen. I mean, they even usurped John McAllen's name. Poor guy, right? And it siphoned businesses and residents away from West McAllen until the original community was a ghost town. This is really lame. The 1911 Charter of Incorporation renamed the second city simply McAllen. It had, in effect, completely absorbed its rival sister. It's like a band that slowly loses all of its original musicians and singer, but it continues with the same name with completely different people, a whole new roster. It's like, wow, is this even the same band anymore, right? As the city continued to burgeon madly, Mexican Americans found themselves increasingly segregated despite the multi-ethnic background of some of the city's original founders. The McAllen Real Estate Board and Delta Development Company worked diligently to keep Mexican Americans on the south side of the tracks, right? Where my grandmother lived, and I spent a lot of my childhood. Elementary schools were completely segregated, though no junior or high school facilities existed for students of Mexican heritage, as it was expected that they would leave school by the end of 6th grade, especially since they usually spent like 3 years in 1st grade learning English. They weren't allowed to pass on to 2nd grade until they knew English. And it was just a way of having lots and lots of really, really cheap labor for ranches and farms. In fact, once McAllen Municipal Hospital opened in January 1923 and then expanded into the McAllen General Hospital 2 years later, doctors with Spanish surnames were not even allowed into the main hospital building, instead being relegated to a remote corner of the basement. So if you're a Mexican doctor, you were going to operate in the basement. When the so-called Bandit Wars exploded in 1915-1916, the state of New York sent 12,000 National Guard soldiers to McAllen to help suppress the feared uprising of Mexican-American rebels. The influx of men sent a jolt through the local economy, and by 1920, the city's population had ballooned to 6,000. Appropriately enough for such a tumultuous and often traumatic birth, McAllen is the site of several different hauntings. The new McAllen City Hall was built in 1995 on the same ground where the segregated McAllen General Hospital once stood. Now, as dark falls, municipal employees are faced with inexplicable occurrences. Drawers open and close by themselves, the sound of paper ruffling wafts from empty rooms, strangers in old-fashioned garb wander the halls, question people they come across, and then enter a restroom on the 2nd floor, only to evaporate without a trace. Clearly, something has disturbed the eternal rest of former patients, but their haunting is relatively recent. For the oldest ghost-infected spot in town, one only has to drive a mile or so away from Houston Avenue to the corner of 10th and Main Streets. And so here's the legend of the hotel. As McAllen's economy boomed after the departure of the New York National Guard, it became clear that the city needed a luxury hotel. A parcel of land across the street from Archer Park, named for its second mayor, was developed, and a 60-room resort in the Spanish colonial revival style was erected in 1918. Named the Casa de Palmas Hotel, the twin-towered building sported red tile and 24-inch thick walls, enclosed by palm-fronded outer patio. Every room faced outward, allowing cool Gulf breezes to delight the guests. With its beautiful salon and private dining rooms, the hotel soon became the center of business, social, and civic events in Hidalgo County. Over the years, important public and private affairs were held at the Casa de Palmas, as when Fidel Castro, freshly bailed out of prison by Mexican President Lázaro Cárdenas, had a clandestine meeting with former Cuban President Carlos Prios Socarrás in January of 1956 to solicit funds for his guerrilla troops. Other happenings, while not exactly as notorious, have left a deep ethereal mark on the site. Odd sounds can be heard, and the telephones in the hotel ring unexpectedly with no one on the other end. But the most spine-tingling strangeness is the appearance of ghostly figures in different areas of the hotel. An elderly lady has been sighted in the basement, wandering aimlessly as if in search of something she's lost. Guests leaving their rooms in the middle of the night claim to have seen a veiled woman drifting somberly along the halls, her black garments suggesting mourning cut short by tragedy. At least one of the poltergeists is known to the staff, the spirit of Miss Roxy, a former employee of the hotel who committed suicide years ago. She can be seen from time to time on the third floor, near where her office was once located, moving about purposefully with vim and verb the way she did when alive. That's kind of weird to have a ghost like this. Dancing around, gotta do this, gotta do that. You're like, wow, you're a ghost. You don't have to do anything anymore. And you should really go stay there. It's a cool hotel, by the way, if you've never stayed there. And the employees will regale you with all kinds of. I had to actually cut them off and say, I think I have enough. Because they'll talk your ear off about all the ghosts. It's great. Normally, the owners or residents of haunted places can hardly can hardly turn to the authorities for help, at least not the local law enforcement agencies. But several decades ago, staff mistook an apparition for an actual flesh and blood human, and the resulting confusion has been recounted again and again down the years. So this is kind of an amusing and freaky story. The hotel manager returned to Casa de Palmas late one night to finish up some paperwork he had left pending. As he exited his car, he chanced to look up at the moon, which floated majestically just above the North Tower. An unexpected figure was silhouetted in one of the archways, a woman with flowing hair, dressed in a white gown. You've got to be kidding me, the manager groaned. Hurrying inside, he confronted the concierge. There is another woman, he gasped, in the tower. How did she get in there? No idea, sir. Should be locked up tight. You and I are the only ones with keys. Well, darn it, go up and get her. The young man swallowed heavily in annoyance and moved to comply. Before long, however, he came down alone. The door's wedged shut, he said with chagrin. I keep calling for her to come out, but she won't answer. The manager groaned and clutched his temples. I'm not in the mood for this. Not again. Smashing the buttons of the lobby phone with urgent fingers, he called the McAllen Police Department. A car was dispatched at once. Two officers arrived about 10 minutes later, a man in his 20s and his older female partner. The manager accompanied them to the stairwell that led up to the room atop the tower. Stay here, sir, the female officer indicated. It's safer that way. They climbed cautiously to the top and tried the door. The knob turned, but the door was jammed shut. Ma'am, called the older cop, McAllen PD, we're going to need you to open up at once. A faint rasping came from the other side. Nothing more. Forget this, the officer muttered to her partner. Come on, Gomez. And I changed the names of the officers, by the way. Let's try to bust it down. He nodded and cast his voice loudly. You need to get away from the door, ma'am. We're coming in by force. The cops looked at each other. Gomez counted down from 3 on his fingers, then they slammed their shoulders against the door. It swung open unexpectedly, throwing the two of them off balance as they went twisting into the room. No one was there. What the heck, Jones? Gomez muttered, reaching for the light switch. Someone's messing with us. The lights came up. The room was definitely empty. Let's go tell the manager he's been pranked, Jones said, shaking her head. Either that or he's been drinking on the job. As they turned to leave, however, the door slammed shut. Gomez growled a curse and yanked on the knob. The door would not budge. Listen up, whoever's on the other side of this. You're about to be arrested. Things will go better for you if you immediately open this door and let us through. For the space of a few seconds, there was no response. And then someone's cell phone rang. Then the lights began to flicker and tremble as the temperature dropped. And isn't that usually what happens right when ghosts are about to appear, that the temperature drops? Without warning, Gomez was lifted bodily into the air and flung against the wall between two arched windows. It was as if an invisible hand were thrusting against his chest, holding him in place. "Jones!" he managed to gasp. His partner was hurrying toward him when something yanked on her shoulder and spun her around. She reached for her sidearm, but the clasp popped open by itself and her pistol went flying through the air, smashing through a window and falling with shards of glass onto the palm trees below. Gomez was released, and he crumpled to the floor, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. "Oh my God, Jones," he rasped frantically. "It's a freaking ghost! What do we do against a ghost?" Looking at the window and then at her partner, she shrugged noncommittally. "They skipped this stuff at the academy." Trying to stay calm for his benefit, Jones walked to the window and peered out, looking for a weapon. Something caught her eye just below the sill. Strands of fine black hair snagged on the stucco. She thought that she could make out a bit of blood. "But I've read a lot. Horror novels, that sort of thing. Why are places haunted, Gomez?" Getting to his feet, her partner shrugged, wobbling a bit. "Beats me, because people die there?" "Yeah, and they leave a trace. Long as that trace is there, their spirit is trapped or whatever." "Okay, so when the trace is gone, so are they?" Jones looked at him. "Yep. You still a smoker?" "Can't seem to get the monkey off my back." "Let me have your lighter." Gomez fumbled in his pockets till he extracted a cheap plastic bic. Nodding, he held it out to her. With a watery sort of shimmer, a woman materialized beside him, her eyes wide with rage. She raked vicious long nails across his bare arm. He dropped the lighter and clutched his aching limb to his chest. Jones did not hesitate. She darted her hand out the window, seized the hair, and then dove for the lighter. The apparition loosed a ghastly scream, her face twisting and distorting. The female cop flicked the flame to life and lit the bloody strands. Just as it hurled herself at her, the poltergeist fizzled away into nothing. The cops stared at each other silently for a moment. Then Gomez cleared his throat. What do we tell people?" His partner looked around them, her eyes falling on the broken window. "We got locked in. I busted a window to call for assistance. That's it. No ghosts. Got it?" Relief fled to the younger cop's eyes. Good idea. Who the heck would believe us anyway? And so, yeah, ghostly things, cops coming up against ghosts, kind of cool. So, they made it out alive. No death there. It's kind of stuff you want to hear. Some of the other stories are a little spookier, a little cooler. One of the ones that I really like a lot, and I'll just recount it to you very quickly and then open up for some questions if you have them, is the story of the Sherry Mansion. Now, John Sherry came from north, and he had studied pharmacy, and he had a pharmacy in his home state. He was the child of immigrants from, I think, Bohemia. Yeah, Bohemia. But he was kind of a restless guy, and he wanted to make more money than you can make in a pharmacy. So he started selling lumber. He was a traveling lumber salesman, which seems kind of weird to me. But anyway, I guess it was a big deal in the early 1900s. And eventually, the idea of all these land deals in the valley caught his eye, and he moved to the valley, and he bought up some land. And at the time, people were experimenting with trying to grow citrus. Now, this is not a tropical paradise, guys, okay? This is like chaparral. This is brushland. And we have some rich soil along the river's edge, but this is not a place of tall palm trees and an exotic locale. It's like just barely one step above a desert, basically. But the irrigation that came in and the tall palms that were brought in and transplanted were all there to create this illusion of this tropical place. But there were people working on breaking the problem of the kind of alkali soils so we could get citrus to grow. And he got involved in that and basically became the godfather of the citrus industry in the valley and really kind of revolutionized the valley economy. He spent a lot of his life doing that, and it wasn't until he was much older that he decided to finally settle down and get married. And the woman he married, however, couldn't have children. And so, he lavished attention on her, built this beautiful mansion. It's huge. If you've never been out to the Sherry Mansion to take a look at it, you really should. And they adopted his wife's niece Mary Alice, right? And she took their last name, Mary Alice Sherry. And eventually she married the future governor of Texas, right? And in his final years, he just like loved those two women to death and doted on them. And I mean, you know, he kind of was a really, really great guy. Like all men, he was flawed and he did some things that we would consider kind of nowadays. But for the most part, he was a really good guy. And so he didn't die in any kind of traumatic way. But when he died, he wanted to be buried on his property. He loved the land so much that he had a chapel built and he was buried there. And then when his wife passed away, she was buried there as well. And the people say that sometimes when you love a place so much, even if there's no trauma, your soul lingers because it can't bear to let go of the land. And so they say that of an evening, as the sun begins to set, John Sherry's soul rises from his little chapel there, and it crosses the yard, and it goes to the porch, and it sits on the rocking chair, and rocks and watches the darkness grow deeper, and looks out at his property. And here's the kind of cool thing. Some worker, because they've recently, over the past 5 years or so, been refurbishing it. It's been, for a while, it was run by the University of Texas Pan American, but it's kind of costly. The taxes alone every year are a major burden. And so it was sold to a private developer, and he's trying to turn it into like kind of a tourist attraction. They're doing a lot of renovation. And some of the workers that were there happened to stay and claimed that they saw his ghost go to the porch. And then they saw his ghost leave the porch and go around the corner of the mansion. And one of these guys had the guts. I wouldn't have had the guts. I would have already driven away the minute I saw the spirit. Had the guts to go around and watch him. And he went out towards the lake and then floated above the lake. And then from shadows on the other side of the lake emerged another spirit, the spirit of his wife. And there underneath the moon and stars, they danced together for a while before disappearing. And I think that that's like a really, really beautiful story. And like it's one of those stories that even if it's not true, you like want it to be true because it's so awesome. The idea that his devotion to the land, her devotion to him, and his devotion to her so much that they're kind of bound up together, like repeating the scene over and over and over for, you know, down the centuries. And you could think of worse ways to spend eternity than to look out over the beautiful land of the valley and spend an evening dancing with your wife's spirit there upon the lake. And I think that's kind of nice. And so there's a mixture of these kinds of things in this collection. And if you decide to pick up a copy and read it, I hope that you'll find much to enjoy and love in those pages, and much perhaps to get indignant about, and much to reflect on as well. And a mixture of all kinds of things. So I'm going to open things up to questions now, comments. Pointed remarks are also accepted. That's perfectly fine. I'm by no means a perfect person.
I have a question.
Sure.
Did you, in your research, ever hear about anything here at this museum or at the old post office?
Oh, sure. There's plenty of. One of the things that we're doing is, depending on the success of this book, I'd like to follow it up with 4 more volumes, one for each county, so that you would have a ghost of Hidalgo County, a ghost of Wilson County, because there are lots of those kinds of stories. Definitely, I understand the post office is haunted, which is kind of awkward for postal workers. You know, you've heard of the dead letter office? Yeah, literally, right? The Mission Post Office, yeah. And there are all kinds of hotels and schools and places up and down. It was really tough to pick because they kind of have limits to how long they want the book to be and so forth. And so we decided on like 17 hauntings and so forth. Because it needed to be like under 200 pages. Their sweet spot is 160, 170 pages. So, but yeah, no, definitely. And you guys have talked about ghosts in the museum itself, haven't you?
Well, I don't know any specific stories.
But there are stories about them.
They say that there are.
Yeah. Well, and you think about it. I mean, any place where you have like a long history of just upheaval and changes and so forth. There are going to be things. You have like La Lomita Chapel where there's a lot of hauntings and in different areas. This is definitely kind of a spooky place. And Mission is one of like the older communities in the valley, along with like Brownsville and Droma and so forth. When you begin to dig, you begin to find all of this stuff. And I mean, you could probably fill dozens of volumes of just ghost tales. And it gets kind of hard sometimes. And the job of a chronicler, of a folklorist, of a historian, is to try to pick the ones that probably stand out the most and like have the most implications for the community or whatever. Yes, ma'am?
Wasn't this place once called the Wild Horse Desert?
It certainly edges it. The here, let me give you, because I'll mess up the name if I don't look it up. So let me look up the name. So I want to get it right. It's in the Hidalgo County. So maybe not the mission area, but as you get closer to like Huesuco and Don and stuff like that, and all those places where you have those resacas, that is called the Mid-Rio Grande Delta Thorn Forest. And so you have, we are edging up against the desert, but a lot of the places along the river itself were part of this thorn forest. Places where there's lots of mesquite and Brazil and ebony and things like that, those kinds of trees, where ocelots and jaguarundis and other types of animals would live. And it was in that brush that the Coahuiltecans lived. When you start getting away from the river area, you start getting into the more like desert areas, especially as you move like west and south. You start getting close to you start edging up against like the Sonoran Desert as well in this region. So, but I'm kind of lame about like nature and stuff like that. Talk to me about ghosts and monsters and all that kind of stuff, and I know. But plants, if somebody were to say, "What kind of plant is that?" If it's not a mesquite tree, I probably have a really hard time. Like I have an application on my phone. Hold on a second. Let me take a picture of its leaf.
Are there any stories about the guy who founded Edinburgh? So I heard that it was named after him, and then they changed the name to Edinburgh because he turned out to be some mass murderer or something.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, sure. That is a little. You're talking about Chapin, the original name of the city. Yeah, Chapin. He wasn't like a mass murderer, but he was like a. He wasn't Texas. He did some bad stuff, and he was a womanizer and like a drinker and a gambler, and just like messed up. And I think he killed one man, and so he had a really, really bad reputation. So what happens was that Edinburgh was originally the city of Hidalgo. Okay, so the city that we now call Hidalgo was called Edinburgh, and that was the county seat. The problem is, it kept flooding all the time, and so you had like the courthouse getting flooded and the records being destroyed, and people were finally like, "Why do we have our courthouse on the floodplain of the Rio Grande? This doesn't make a lot of sense." So they moved the courthouse and everything all the way up to Chapin and renamed Chapin Edinburgh, and then renamed Edinburgh Hidalgo, which is really confusing, right? So yeah. And there were a lot of people that were up in arms about it. They did not want the community, the people that lived in Hidalgo were furious because they were like, right now, this is the county seat, and like it's a vibrant, important, part of the county. If you move all of that political activity away from here, and municipal activity, like miles and miles away, then our community's gonna like shrivel up and die. And so it was problematic. But and there, around that time is also when the one person who was hanged at the Hidalgo County Jail and the newly established Edinburgh was, locked up and eventually made to swing from the gallows. And that's a harrowing story as well that's in here. And in that story of the Hidalgo County Jail, I discuss these things, and I talk about Chapin and the fact that he was kind of like he was an embarrassment for all the other like pioneers of the valley, and they said, "Well, this is perfect. We need to get this guy's name off the city anyway." So it worked out really well. Although we still have a street named after him there in Edinburgh. So, other questions?
Are you selling your books?
The museum's selling them.
Are they? How much are they?
And let's ask them. Because like sometimes I sell my books at some events, but they've got books.
$20?
They're selling the books for $20, okay? And then of
What
course,
are you selling them for?
I don't want to talk about that.
That's what the publisher told us.
Yeah, you guys, they're the books that you got from the publisher. You're the one. You have to pay the publisher for them. So you sell them at the price that you need to sell them at. I'm not gonna get involved in that. I don't even want to bring up the. Because what if I'm selling them for cheaper or more? Let's not do that. The books go for $18.99 plus tax, so 20. I guess that seems fair. And that way you don't have to worry. That also you don't have to worry about change. I guess. I mean that makes sense. If you charge like $18.99, then you got to figure out how you're gonna like have enough ones to like give people and how many pennies too. So you give them $1.01 back. Yes, ma'am.
This is not a ghostly question, but a historical.
Oh, please ask
What's
anything.
the connection between Edinburgh and Scotland? So is there?
Yeah, because Chapman was he was from Scotland, and so he named it after Edinburgh in honor of it. But they dropped the H to differentiate it between the two. So. And of course, in the valley, we don't call it. We don't say Edinburgh. We say, you guys know how people pronounce it in the valley? We say Edinburgh. You heard it right? I live in Edinburgh. Like there's a G after the N. Edinburgh. I think it's cute. Or if you speak Spanish, soy de Edimburgo, right? Edimburgo. I love it. Yes? You had a question, sir?
Yes, we asked some friends about Grande, local friends, and they had never seen or heard of one. Can you elaborate on
Of a what?
Grande?
Oh, about Jaguarundi. Yeah. I'm, you know what? I'm not even sure how you pronounce it in English, to be honest with you. I wonder. I keep asking myself, is it Jaguar? Would it be a Jaguarundi? I just always say it in Spanish Jaguarundi. So, but they are. They're slightly smaller than like a puma or like a cougar. I guess you would probably say it. And their coloring is kind of like a puma, a cougar. You know, like brown. But their pelt changes. When they're younger, it's like darker, and then it gets a little bit lighter as they mature. They have strange looking faces though, because they're kind of like, they're rounder than most big cats' faces. And they have kind of like some like black markings at the tip of their tail or whatever. And they were almost driven to extinction in the Rio Grande Valley, but they've been coming back in a big way. Yes?
Do they have a long tail?
They have a long tail.
There's one that lives on the beach.
Oh, wow.
It has a round face.
Yeah, like a rounded face.
Almost like a bobcat.
Yes, almost like a bobcat. Very
I
good.
thought it was a bobcat.
Yeah, but it's like a darker brown, and it's got the long tail.
I had it in front of my car, and
Yeah. Yes, that is a Jaguarundi or Jaguarundi, or however you pronounce it. Yes?
Just a comment,
Uh-huh.
back to Tom Mayfield,
Yes.
because one of the stories that you alluded to, he's either credited with, and I know that there's still some dispute, but he was supposed to have arrested the guy that was carrying
The Plan de San Diego, yes. Yes, he was. He was the guy who picked him up. It was, in other words, this guy crossed. He was actually a Mexican official. He crossed. So this Mexican official comes across. He's got the Plan de San Diego with him. He approaches some people in downtown McAllen at like a restaurant or a barbershop, something like that. And the owner of this place calls up a judge who then calls up, I think it's a judge, who then calls up Tom Mayfield. Tom Mayfield goes and arrests the guy. So yes, he was the one who arrested and found that document, the Plan de San Diego. So he was, kind of... It's possible that if that had not happened, that people kind of would have just like not known about it, and it would have been blown over and whatever. And a lot of what happened afterwards might not have happened. And so, like just looking at it from a historical perspective, some people want to lay that blame at the feet of him as well. Good question. Yes, ma'am.
Just a comment.
Uh-huh.
I have an uncle on my dad's side who was like, 86, 87. According to him, as ironic as it is, Tom Mayfield married a Mexican-American woman. I don't know if you have heard that.
Well, I mean, I know that Tom Mayfield married an Anglo woman, and I don't know for sure whether after their divorce he might have gotten remarried. I don't know, because I didn't encounter any information about that. That doesn't mean that it's not true. It just means that it's not in like the public record about him anywhere that I could find. The name of his wife is like listed in the Bible. Can't remember right now, but she was like a school teacher. She was Anglo. So, to me, it wouldn't surprise me at all because you don't have to, I mean, in order for you to be a cruel, vicious racist, it's not like you can't also marry somebody from the very race that you despise, that you're putting down, because marriage and marital relations are not always about like equality and respect and things like that. There are other reasons that people get married sometimes, right? Okay, so unless there are any other more questions, our time has kind of come to an end. If anybody buys the book, I'll be happy to sign it. And you can find me online at davidbulls.us. There's a bunch of information about my work and my other books and so forth. Also other appearances that I'll be doing. For example, like I'll be at the McAllen Book Festival and things like that. That is a cool, looks like a Halloween bear, right? She's got like this really cool, cute little Halloween bear. It's like drawing my attention. You can see how infantile I am. I'm like, I want one of those. Sometimes men and women will nod their heads at this. Sometimes men take a very long time to stop being boys, if they ever do, right? And I think we carry an, we never do, right? Okay, there's no hope. It's all right. We just get used to it. Thank you so much, guys. You've been so pleasant, and I appreciate it.